Hello and welcome to MRCPsych on the Go Revision Essentials. My name is Dr. Alapasurlicker and I'm a psychiatry trainee in the west of Scotland. Like many of you, I spent a lot of time commuting. This was valuable time that I could have spent revising for the MRCPsych examination. And so, I've started this podcast to help you revise on the go. Each episode breaks down one high-yield topic mapped to the syllabus. This is then followed by 5 questions to help reinforce your learning. So, grab your headphones, turn travel time into revision time, and let's get started. In episode 26, we explored the biology of stress, including Saley's general adaptation syndrome and the role of the HPA axis and cortisol in the stress response. In this episode, we turn from the biology of stress to its social causes. Specifically, we ask, what kinds of events and experiences generate stress? 2 main bodies of research have addressed this question. The first concerns major life events, significant changes in a person's circumstances that require substantial readjustment. The second concerns daily hassles, the minor but persistent irritants of everyday life. We begin with major life events and the work of Thomas Holmes and Richard Rahe. Thomas Holmes was an American psychiatrist working at the University of Washington in Seattle. Richard Rahe was a naval medical officer and stress researcher. Together, they developed one of the most widely cited instruments in stress research, the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, published in 1967. Holmes had observed clinically that many of his patients had experienced a clustering of significant life changes shortly before the onset of illness. He wanted to quantify this observation systematically. Holmes and Rahe asked thousands of participants to rate 43 life events in terms of the degree of adjustment each event required. They used marriage as an anchor event, assigning it a score of 50, and asked participants to rate all other events relative to this. The resulting scores were called life change units. The scale ranked events from the most demanding to the least. The top ranked events on the scale include the death of a spouse, scoring 100 life change units, divorce at 73, marital separation at 65, imprisonment at 63, and the death of a close family member at 63. Crucially, positive events also featured on the scale. Marriage scored 50, pregnancy 40, and an outstanding personal achievement 28. This reflected Holmes and Rahe's central argument. It is the requirement for adjustment, not the valence of the event, that generates stress. Remember, Holmes and Rahe's Social Readjustment Rating Scale assigns life change units to 43 life events. The top rank event is the death of a spouse. Rahe went on to test this model prospectively with American Navy personnel. He assessed the life change unit scores before deployment and then monitored health records during service. He found a significant positive correlation between high scores in the preceding 6 months and the incidence of illness during deployment. Those in the highest quartile experienced approximately twice the illness rate of those in the lowest quartile. Subsequent research extended these findings to psychiatric outcomes, linking high life event scores to increased rates of depression, anxiety, and psychosis onset. But the Social Readjustment Rating Scale has important limitations. It treats all people as equivalent in their response to the same event, which does not account for individual differences in vulnerability or resilience. It also relies on retrospective self-report, which introduces recall bias. We will return to these themes of vulnerability and resilience in later episodes. Remember, the model has limitations including its failure to account for individual differences in vulnerability and its reliance on retrospective self-report. While Holmes and Rahe focused on major life events, Alan Kanner and his colleagues at the University of California, Berkeley challenged the dominant Holmes and Rahe model in 1981. They argued that it is not only the dramatic upheavals of life that generate stress, but the minor, repetitive irritants of everyday experience. Kanner developed the Hassel scale, a measure of 117 common daily irritants, alongside the uplifts scale, a measure of small positive experiences. Daily hassles are the minor stressors of everyday life. Common examples include losing things, traffic jams, and concerns about weight. Daily uplifts are small positive events that buffer the effects of hassles. Examples include completing a task, spending time with a pet, and feeling healthy. Kanner's research found that daily hassle scores were more strongly predictive of psychological symptoms, including anxiety and depression, than major life event scores alone. The chronic, grinding quality of daily hassles appeared to have a cumulative and particularly damaging effect on well-being. Uplifts were found to partially buffer the negative effects of hassles, particularly for women in the original sample. Research building on Kanner's work introduced what is sometimes called the rule of one. You do not need a large or life-changing positive event to reverse the damage of a difficult day. A single, high-quality daily uplift can be enough. Something as simple as a perfect cup of coffee or a funny message from a friend. Research suggests these small moments can measurably lower cortisol levels. They can effectively reset the physiological strain caused by an entire morning of hassles. This is clinically useful. When working with patients under chronic stress, it is worth exploring not just the burden of daily hassles, but whether there are any uplifts still present in their day. Their absence can be as informative as their presence. Remember, Kanner proposed that daily hassles, minor but persistent stressors, are strong predictors of psychological distress. Daily uplifts, small positive experiences, can partially buffer their effects. The distinction between major life events and daily hassles maps onto a broader distinction between acute and chronic stressors. Acute stressors are discrete events with a clear onset and offset, such as a bereavement or a car accident. Chronic stressors are ongoing demands without a clear endpoint, such as financial hardship, a difficult marriage, or a demanding job. Research suggests that chronic stressors are particularly damaging to both physical and mental health, partly because they do not allow the physiological stress response to fully resolve. This links back to Saley's exhaustion stage, in which sustained activation of the HPA axis leads to cumulative physiological harm. In clinical practice, a thorough assessment of both acute life events and chronic background stressors is essential. Asking only about major events may miss the cumulative burden of daily hassles that is driving a patient's distress. Remember, acute stressors are discrete events. Chronic stressors are ongoing demands. Chronic stress is particularly harmful because it sustains HPA axis activation and prevents physiological recovery. Now, let's test your recall. I will read out 5 exam-style questions. After each one, I will pause for 10 seconds so you can attempt them before hearing the answer. Question 1. A patient presents with a depressive episode. You discover that in the past year she's married, moved house, changed jobs and had a baby. How does the Holmes and Rahe model help explain her presentation? All 4 events, even positive ones such as marriage and a new baby, carry significant life change units because each requires substantial adjustment. The cumulative LCU score may have exceeded the threshold associated with increased illness risk, contributing to her depression. Question 2. What is the highest scoring event on the social readjustment rating scale, and what score does it carry? Death of a spouse, scoring 100 life change units. Question 3. A patient with generalized anxiety disorder denies any major life events in the past year, but reports feeling overwhelmed by his workload, financial worries, and family demands. Which theoretical framework best accounts for his stress burden? Kanner's daily hassles model. His stress burden arises not from major acute events, but from the accumulation of chronic minor stressors. Question 4. Why did Holmes and Rahe include positive life events, such as marriage and pregnancy, on the social readjustment rating scale? Because it is the demand for adjustment, not the emotional valence of the event, that generates stress. Both positive and negative events require the individual to modify their behaviour and expectations, placing demands on adaptive resources. Lastly, question 5. Name one key limitation of the social readjustment rating scale as a measure of stress. It does not account for individual differences in vulnerability or resilience. It relies on retrospective self-report, introducing recall bias, and it assumes the same event has equivalent impact on all individuals. Let's summarise what we have learnt today. Holmes and Rahe developed the Social Readjustment Rating Scale in 1967, assigning life change units to 43 life events. Both positive and negative events generate stress through the demand for adjustment. Higher cumulative LCU scores predict increased illness risk. Kanner's daily hassles and uplifts research show that minor but persistent stressors are strong predictors of psychological distress, sometimes more so than major life events alone. Daily uplifts can partially buffer their effects. In our next episode, we explore the psychology of conflict and trauma. We will look at the different types of psychological conflict, the impact of traumatic experience, and the connection to post-traumatic stress disorder. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of MRCPsych on the Go Revision Essentials. I hope this episode helped to move your revision forward. If you have any questions or just want to continue the discussion, you can find me on LinkedIn at MRCPsych on the Go, spelled MRCPysch on the go. This podcast is about making revision accessible. If you found it useful, liking and sharing it with others helps the goal more than anything else. That's it for today. I'm Dr. Alapas Ehrlicher, and as always, keep revising on the go.